Welcome to the Inside Story. I'm Billy Hallowell, and we are here today to talk about a very important issue, Christian persecution. I'm joined by the Christian Post, Ryan Foley. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
You were recently at a CPAC summit that addressed this issue of Christian persecution. What can you tell us about that gathering?
It was a day-long event at the Kennedy Center featuring multiple panel discussions and speeches focusing on threats to religious freedom at home and abroad. There was a consistent focus on Nigeria throughout the event, as well as other existential threats facing the United States and the world, including the Chinese Communist Party. It had a very similar focus as the International Religious Freedom Summit, which I have covered multiple times for the Christian Post.
Yeah, this is an issue that is blowing up around the world. Christian persecution is not new. Obviously, it's been around since the beginning of the church, but you would assume that in 2025, this issue would be getting better. You mentioned Nigeria being a main topic. I know you mentioned some of the other main topics. What is the situation right now in Nigeria? Why was that such a focal point?
I think they focused a lot about the government complicity in the attacks, which I have written an article about, as well as the general dismissal of what happens there as having nothing to do with religion, more having to do with climate change. And people were saying that probably explains why the Biden administration had Nigeria off the list of countries of particular concern. The Trump administration put it there during the last year of his first term. It's still not back yet, but there was definitely consensus that Nigeria needs to be on the list of countries of particular concern. Maybe that will put pressure on the government to more adequately respond to the attacks on Christians by the Fulanis.
Well, and Nigeria was on that list again, the list of countries of particular concern with the U.S. State Department, which puts a lot of pressure on Nigeria and the government there to do something about persecution. It was then removed by the Biden administration, and the push, of course, like you're saying, is to get it back on that list again under the new Trump administration, which again had previously put Nigeria on that list before it was removed by the subsequent administration. When you were at this event, what were some of the trends that most surprised you?
South Korea was a big surprise to me. While I had heard a little bit about the persecution of a megachurch pastor there, and he was recently imprisoned, I learned a lot more about the extent of the persecution at the event yesterday. South Korea isn't a country most people would expect to hear about when they think of religious intolerance. There's a lot of megachurches and religious revival there, but it seems like the government as of late has been more hostile to Christians.
Yeah, and I think that issue obviously is getting worse, not better. Were there any positive trajectories at all? And I know this is an odd question on this, and there may not be, that you observed, during this summit, or was it basically a sound of the alarm that things are really descending?
And there was some positive talk there about how the Supreme Court here in the United States have become much more favorable to religious liberty in recent years, and people are optimistic that Nigeria will be placed back on the list of countries of particular concern. At the same time, there is concern that despite the Supreme Court becoming much more favorable to religious liberty and handing down favorable rulings, there's concern that lower courts are reluctant to adopt Supreme Court precedent or tend to flat out ignore it. And of course, the fact that people have to spend years in litigation in the first place is troubling.
Yeah, this is an issue that it's a spiritual battle, and it goes far beyond just what we're seeing, happen before us. There's a lot of other stuff driving this. Why do Christians need to be aware of these issues?
Christians need to be aware of these issues because the threat to freedom overseas is a warning that threat to freedom can happen over here. There wasn't just necessarily talk about, it wasn't all specifically religious topics. There was a journalist from Minnesota who spent over a decade doing her dream job for a mainstream news outlet only to quit because of her outrage over how the media covered the George Floyd death. So there was a lot of talk about free speech, and I believe one of the people who spoke yesterday talked about persecution with a smile. While persecution is definitely much more secure overseas, there's persecution with a smile that happens here in the United States in the name of anti-discrimination.
Yeah. This is the thing, and I've often talked to people about this. People will say, well, Americans can't complain because the religious discrimination that happens here is nothing like what happens in Nigeria. And that is true. But every bit of persecution that we see around the world in North Korea, in China, in Nigeria, it all started somewhere. And I think that's the part of this persecution conversation that's important, keeping things in perspective and understanding the difference between what America has seen and what these other countries in horrific circumstances have seen, while also recognizing that the seeds of persecution are set many times in ways that we would not expect. And so there's a lot there to really unpack. But for a final question here, I mean, you're a journalist, you cover these issues. What can we learn from the plight of Christians who face persecution? What lessons can we take away?
Never give up, never give in. Many of these people in other countries are willing to die or face prison rather than renounce their faith or comply with blasphemy laws.
Mm. Well, I am so appreciative of you joining us today, diving in with us. Thank you so much for taking the time, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you.
Everyone else, make sure you tune in next week for another episode of The Inside Story. You can check this story and many others out over at the Christian Post. We'll see you next week.